The studio lights blaze like 1,000 miniature suns, bouncing off glass panels and camera lenses, capturing every twitch and flicker of emotion. Across the scrolling chyron, bold letters flash headlines that seem ripped from a political thriller. Live showdown, unfiltered. The audience at home leans forward as the villain seizes the microphone, his smile a calculated smirk, his words sharpened to wound. With an almost theatrical flick of his hand, he delivers the line that jolts the room, a sweeping insult aimed at immigrants, their families, their dreams, their dignity. The words hang in the air like smoke, staining the atmosphere, heavy with contempt. Gasps ripple through the crowd. On social feeds, comments explode like fireworks, hashtags igniting in real time. And there, under the same glare of studio lights, sits the hero. Her eyes remain steady, unblinking, a portrait of calm in a storm of arrogance. Her hands rest lightly on the desk, fingers curled as though weighing centuries of struggle and resilience in her palms. She doesn't rise to the bait. Not yet. The villain glances at her, expecting a flinch, a rebuttal, a stumble, anything to break the silence. Instead, she meets his gaze with something deeper than defiance, a quiet knowing, the kind of steadiness that comes from surviving harder battles than this. Viewers at home feel it before they can name it, a pulse, a flicker, a surge of pride. Immigrant parents sitting in living rooms across the country whisper their children's names as if invoking a prayer. Teenagers in crowded apartments grip their phones tighter, recording every frame, every look, waiting to share the clip that will travel beyond the studio walls. The villain shifts in his chair, a faint crease of uncertainty tugging at his brow. His smirk wavers. Cameras zoom in, catching every bead of sweat. Commentators backstage glance at one another, sensing a tremor before the quake. And still, the hero waits. One breath, then another, silence turning into power. Somewhere in that silence lives a promise, an answer coiled like lightning, ready to strike. But what unfolded moments later would send shockwaves through every screen across America.
Hours before the broadcast began, the country was already on edge. The past months had been a relentless drumbeat of headlines. New policies tightening the borders, hearings filled with heated rhetoric, speeches about real Americans echoing through halls of power. Communities that had long felt unseen were watching with cautious hope, while others drummed up fear as a weapon. Into this combustible atmosphere came tonight's live show. Not just another debate, but a proxy battlefield for the soul of the nation. Producers could sense it. Camera operators whispered about record viewership even before the first ad break. Every detail, from the gleaming desk to the tense silence before the on-air signal, hummed with the charge of impending collision. On social media, the anticipation was electric. Hashtags sprouted before the guests had even arrived at the studio. Progressive organizers posted, "We're watching." Conservative commentators warned of a smear ambush. Influencers stitched together teasers, splicing past footage of the villain's controversial statements with clips of the hero's speeches at rallies where immigrant families waved flags of both their old and new homelands. By the time the lights came up, tens of thousands were already live tweeting reactions to an event that hadn't happened yet. The stakes were not only political, but personal. The villain had built his reputation on portraying immigrants as opportunists, questioning their loyalty and belittling their contributions. The hero, by contrast, had become a symbol of a new generation, bold, intersectional, unapologetic. To her supporters, she embodied the dignity of their parents' journeys and their own hard-won place in the national story. To the villain, she was a target, a living rebuke to everything he claimed was under threat. Viewers understood instinctively that this was more than a clash of personalities. It was a test of which vision of America would prevail, one of open doors and shared struggle, or one of suspicion and hierarchy. The studio became an arena, each camera angle magnifying the stakes. Commentators on both sides framed it as a make-or-break moment. Even those who claimed neutrality couldn't resist watching, the tension pulling them in like gravity. Inside the hero's camp, aides monitored the feeds with wide eyes, seeing how every raised eyebrow or clipped word might ricochet into millions of impressions. They knew the villain's tactics. He would provoke, distort, and try to knock her off balance. But they also trusted her poise, her ability to transform an attack into a story about values. Outside the studio, supporters gathered in bars, living rooms, and community centers, projecting the debate onto walls, cheering or jeering as the dialogue unfolded. It felt less like a program and more like an event, a collective reckoning playing out in real time. Parents pointed at the screen, telling their children, "This is why we vote. This is why we march." Young organizers whispered, "Tonight changes everything," as they refreshed their feeds to see memes already forming from mere expressions and gestures. All the while, the villain seemed to thrive on the spectacle, relishing the cameras, confident that his bluster would drown out nuance. But that confidence, so easily mistaken for strength, was brittle. The audience could feel it, like a storm cloud about to split. Something was shifting under the surface, a current moving too deep to measure, yet too powerful to ignore. Every word, every pause, every breath was being scrutinized by millions. One misstep could become a defining clip. One deft answer could ignite a movement. And in that suspended moment before the hero spoke, the weight of history pressed down, not just on her shoulders, but on everyone watching who saw their own reflection in her calm gaze. Yet even this was only the beginning. The real test was still to come. Long before the bright lights of tonight's broadcast, the villain had been constructing a carefully curated image, the self-styled crusader who tells it like it is. He launched his career not in quiet service, but in spectacle, inflammatory sound bites, calculated confrontations, and a knack for turning outrage into airtime. He understood television's hunger for conflict and made himself its most willing supplier. Yet behind the slogans and stagecraft lay a pattern: arrogance dressed up as authority, a hunger for applause that thrived on belittling others. In his early days, he rose to prominence by railing against immigrants on talk radio, his voice a permanent sneer. Each controversy seemed only to boost his profile. Sponsors balked, but listeners multiplied. Even then, though, cracks showed. He promised to champion working Americans while vacationing on private yachts, to stand for family values while leaving his own family life in shambles. These contradictions whispered a truth his followers couldn't yet see. His brand was performance, not principle. When he entered public office, the pattern deepened. Behind closed doors, colleagues described him as dismissive and controlling, quick to mock staff and undermine allies. Publicly, he thundered about accountability. Privately, he bent rules to suit his own ambitions. He seemed untouchable until his temper became a liability. Clips of him berating reporters went viral. Fact-checkers caught him in blatant contradictions. But instead of retreating, he doubled down, insisting he was being persecuted by a biased press. Yet arrogance breeds complacency. In one infamous episode, he staged a town hall meant to showcase his popularity, but stacked the audience with loyalists and planted questions. When an unvetted attendee asked about his offshore investments, contradicting his claim of being one of the people, he snapped, calling the man a nobody and ordering security to remove him. The video spread like wildfire, a meme of hypocrisy he never fully outran.
It was the first time polls showed a dip in his invincibility, and it left an indelible stain on his image. Despite these warning signs, his strategy stayed the same: escalate, distract, and attack. He learned to weaponize social media, turning each backlash into another badge of honor. But behind the bluster, former staffers tell of a man rattled by self-doubt, glued to his phone for validation, obsessed with trending numbers as if they were proof of worth. Every time his name trended, he felt momentarily immortal. Every time the numbers dipped, he raged at aides, demanding a new stunt to claw back the spotlight. And so he built a fortress of attention, but left his flanks exposed. The public persona, the fighter who scorned compromise, masked a fragile ego terrified of being eclipsed. For years, immigrant communities bore the brunt of his rhetoric, each insult calculated to stir his base. But with each attack, the opposition grew more organized, more unified. His name became a rallying cry not for admiration, but resistance. Young activists learned to dissect his talking points, to counter his narratives with facts and stories of their own. The pattern became clear to anyone watching closely. Each high-profile clash gave him a short-term boost, but planted seeds of long-term loss. Each arrogant dismissal created another rival. Each hypocritical indulgence eroded his claim to authenticity. Even in tonight's studio, when he unleashed his latest insult, you could almost trace the path back through years of rehearsed outrage, the same tone, the same smug glance, as if no lesson had ever been learned. Commentators have begun to say his downfall isn't a sudden collapse, but a slow erosion, a tide pulling back from a castle built of sand. Very tactics that elevated him are now clichés, stripped of their shock value. Younger audiences see through them. Even some longtime supporters have grown uneasy. It is as though he is performing a script from another era, unaware the stage has changed. And there's another dimension. His rivals have studied him. The hero, seated across from him tonight, has spent years watching his tactics, understanding his rhythms. She knows when he overreaches, when he grows careless, when the mask slips. Her calm silence in the opening moments wasn't hesitation, but strategy, a counterpoint forged from experience. Where he charges, she waits. Where he sneers, she listens. Where he inflames, she grounds. All of it points to a turning point that feels inevitable. The villain still believes his invincibility narrative, but the cracks are obvious now, illuminated by the very spotlights he sought. Tonight's confrontation isn't just another ratings grab, it's the culmination of years of arrogance and hypocrisy converging in a single, live broadcast crucible. The audience can sense it. This is no longer simply about an insult or a debate. It's about a reckoning years in the making. But across the aisle, a very different story was unfolding.
Long before she sat beneath the searing lights of the studio, before her name trended across millions of screens, the hero's story began in a cramped apartment on the edge of a city that barely knew her family existed. Her parents had arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases and a belief that hard work could carve a place out of a nation that promised freedom. The hallway of their first home smelled of spices from every continent, a mosaic of languages echoing off cracked walls. As a child, she learned to translate government letters for neighbors, to decipher bureaucratic jargon, to help others navigate a world that seemed designed to keep them out. She carried that sense of duty like a second skin. School was both sanctuary and battlefield. Teachers mispronounced her name until she insisted they get it right. She worked after classes at the corner store to help cover bills, then stayed up late reading speeches of civil rights leaders on a second-hand laptop. Friends remember her as a quiet force, the girl who mediated disputes, who comforted classmates teased for their accents,
who wrote essays about justice, not because she expected an award, but because she felt the words were part of her survival. In college, she sharpened her voice. She organized campus forums on immigration reform, stood at the microphone even when hecklers tried to shout her down. Each protest she led, each op-ed she published, became another stone in the foundation of a public life rooted in service rather than spectacle. While others courted internships at corporations, she interned at legal clinics, translating for families facing deportation hearings, absorbing their stories, filing them away like ammunition for a future she couldn't yet name. Her principles were forged in personal cost. When her father was laid off from his factory job, she took a semester off to work full-time, sending money home while juggling night classes. When an elected official dismissed immigrant workers as replaceable, she gathered testimonies from janitors, delivery drivers, and farmhands, compiling them into a public report that went viral. She learned that the power to tell your own story could rival the power to write laws. After graduating, she entered public service, not the glamorous kind, but the trench work of policy advocacy and community organizing. She spent long nights in windowless rooms drafting statements, helping victims of wage theft, guiding young immigrants through college applications. Slowly, her reputation grew, a reliable advocate who listened first, who didn't flinch when faced with hostility. When local TV invited her to debate an anti-immigrant pundit, she accepted, expecting a civil exchange. Instead, he tried to humiliate her. She kept her composure, dismantling his talking points with facts and lived experience. That clip became her first viral moment, the seed of a larger platform. But her rise wasn't meteoric. It was incremental and earned. She won a seat on a city council, then in a state legislature. Each campaign fueled by volunteers who saw their own reflection in her story. Her speeches weren't polished theater, but rooted testimony, weaving policy with kitchen table struggles. She stood at naturalization ceremonies, handing out voter registration cards, shaking hands with people who had waited years for that moment. She spent weekends tutoring children of new arrivals, telling them their accent was an asset, not a flaw. Through it all, she cultivated an inner steel. Those who worked closest to her describe an almost meditative discipline. Up before dawn for a run, handwritten notes to constituents, hours of prep before every public appearance. She absorbed attacks without losing her moral compass, never confusing virality with virtue. She studied her adversaries' patterns, noting the way certain figures used outrage as armor. She vowed never to mirror their tactics. And then came the invitation to Tonight's Show. By then, she had already clashed with the villain in committee hearings and public rallies. She knew his rhythm: provoke, perform, pivot. She also knew his weakness. He underestimated the quiet. In strategy meetings, her aides advised sharp comebacks, viral quips, but she said no. She wanted to model something different: calm, truth-telling, dignity. A test of patience in a culture addicted to shouting. This is what viewers sensed when they saw her in the opening minutes of the broadcast. Not timidity, but tensile strength. Every hardship had prepared her for this moment. The late nights at the store counter, the protests drowned out by jeers, the policy battles in windowless rooms. She had learned to turn silence into pressure, composure into spectacle, and values into armor. Across the country, families recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look their parents carried when signing mortgage papers in a language they didn't fully understand. The same look on marchers' faces when holding homemade signs under a burning sun. It was the look of someone who understood that dignity itself can be a form of power.
And as the villain spat his insult during the opening exchange, she summoned all of that history, all of that practice, into a single pause. The pause that made him sweat, that made audiences lean forward, that turned a moment of attack into an opening for transformation. She wasn't just defending herself, she was embodying the resilience of millions. And as destiny would have it, all of that would collide in one unforgettable moment.
The studio's temperature seemed to rise with every passing minute, the air charged like a thundercloud about to break. Cameras swiveled to capture every micro-expression, the control room cutting feverishly between tight shots of the villain's sneer and the hero's calm face. Millions at home watched the ticker crawl across the screen. Live, verbal fireworks erupt. What began as a panel discussion now pulsed with the intensity of a prize fight, each word a jab, each pause a test of endurance. The villain leaned forward, his voice growing sharper, a staccato of insults framed as hard truths. He accused the hero of betraying real Americans, mocked her record of advocacy, and tried to paint her as a fringe figure out of touch with the nation's heartland. His hands chopped the air for emphasis, each gesture rehearsed for maximum clip potential. Yet behind his bravado, a subtle tremor betrayed him, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a glance toward the cameras to confirm they were still on him. Across from him, the hero sat steady, hands clasped, her expression unreadable. She allowed him to build his crescendo, each accusation stacking atop the next, like a tower built too high. The studio audience murmured, gasped, and at moments hissed. One particularly barbed remark drew a collective groan. Social media erupted seconds later, hashtags proliferating, hashtag stay strong, hashtag live showdown, hashtag enough already. Producers flashed graphics showing tweets from celebrities and civic leaders weighing in mid-broadcast. The hero finally spoke, not with fury, but with a measured tone that sliced more cleanly than any shout. She corrected his distortions point by point, citing facts, then pivoted to personal stakes, invoking stories of families she had helped. Her words weren't just counter-arguments, they were portraits of lives at stake. Each anecdote landed like a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading across the studio. The villain interrupted, louder now, trying to claw back control. His face flushed, he jabbed a finger toward her, calling her naive and dangerous. But the camera caught the sweat at his temples, the stiffness creeping into his shoulders. Commentators whispered in the wings, sensing the shift. The hero remained serene, like a chess player watching an opponent squander his advantage. Viewers at home could feel the tempo changing. Live polls on news sites showed sympathy swinging toward the hero. Journalists on Twitter noted the villain's escalating volume, the way he repeated phrases as if he hoped they would sound truer the second time. Meanwhile, the hero's responses grew more precise, her voice steady, her posture unshaken. Then came the exchange that crystallized the tension. The villain, red-faced, accused her of being an infiltrator in her own country. The words landed with a thud, a naked attempt to question her legitimacy. A stunned hush fell over the room, followed by an audible gasp. In that silence, cameras zoomed in, her eyes narrowing, his jaw clenching, the entire nation hanging on what would follow. The moderator tried to interject, but the villain plowed ahead, his tone verging on desperation. He waved papers in the air, claiming proof of her radical agenda, but the pages fluttered like props, blank under scrutiny. The audience's murmurs grew louder, some even laughed nervously. Social media feeds filled with side-by-side shots of the villain's frantic gestures and the hero's composed stillness. The hero inhaled, a small but deliberate motion. She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing her next move, her silence speaking louder than any retort. The villain's voice now sounded shrill, echoing in the sudden quiet. It was a rare reversal, the aggressor beginning to look cornered, the defender poised to become the storyteller. Producers in the control booth sensed it too, directing camera 3 to stay tight on the villain's face, capturing every flicker of doubt. They cut to reaction shots, a young viewer in the audience clutching her phone, a veteran shaking his head, a journalist typing furiously. The clash had transcended debate. It was now theater, and the villain was losing his role. Yet through it all, the hero did not gloat, did not even smirk. Her eyes stayed focused, her hands still folded. She seemed to understand that moments like these could outlive the broadcast, replayed endlessly, shaping narratives long after the credits rolled. Her restraint was not passivity, but precision, a coil of energy waiting for release. The villain's voice cracked slightly on his next line. It was barely perceptible, but in a live broadcast, every tremor becomes a headline. He looked down at his notes, then up at her, and for a heartbeat, the cameras caught something like uncertainty in his eyes. That was when the nation leaned in, sensing a balance about to tip, an arrow about to fly. No one could have predicted what the hero would do next.
For a moment, the studio held its breath. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim, as if the room itself knew something irreversible was about to happen. The villain's last words still hung in the air like smoke, heavy and acrid, but the hero didn't rush to swat them away. She sat upright, eyes steady, fingers lightly touching the edge of the desk. Millions of viewers felt the pause stretch, a silence so deliberate it became a spectacle of its own. Then she leaned toward the microphone, not a tremor in her voice, not a flicker of hesitation. "Let me tell you a story," she began, her tone low but carrying, the way a tide carries a ship. "Not about me, but about us." The audience shifted forward. Producers cut to a close-up, her face illuminated, her gaze fixed directly into the camera, as if she were speaking into every living room at once. She started with the night her parents arrived in America, two strangers clutching a borrowed suitcase and a promise. She painted the scene not as nostalgia, but as testimony. Her father's hands blistered from his first construction job, her mother working double shifts to keep food on the table, both learning English at kitchen tables stacked with dictionaries and overdue bills. She said, "They didn't come here to take anything. They came here to give, to work, to build, to belong." Each sentence landed with a thud of quiet truth, a hammer against the scaffolding of the villain's narrative. The villain tried to interject, but she lifted one hand slightly, not a command, but an anchor, and kept going. She cited data about immigrant-owned businesses, veterans who served while still waiting for citizenship, the billions in taxes paid, the lives saved by doctors and nurses who had crossed oceans. But she didn't stop at numbers. She wove them into human faces, naming constituents she'd met, quoting their words. "America's story," she said, "is not a gated community. It's a front door." The crowd erupted into applause, the first audible cheer of the night. Camera swung to the villain's face. He gripped his notes tighter, the paper crumpling under his fingers. His rehearsed smirk flickered, replaced with something closer to disbelief. He had prepared for a counterpunch, but not for an elegy that turned into a battle cry. She pivoted to his hypocrisy with surgical precision. Without raising her voice, she recalled his offshore accounts, his record of cutting benefits while campaigning as a populist, his pattern of belittling immigrants even as his businesses relied on their labor. "You talk about real Americans, but the people who clean your offices, who build your hotels, who keep this country running, they are real Americans too." Gasps swept through the studio like a gust of wind. On social media, clips of her words began to circulate instantly, the hashtags now tilting in her favor. Hashtag Front Door America, hashtag Real Americans. She paused again, letting the weight of her words settle. "I am not here to shout you down," she said. "I am here to lift up the truth." Her eyes didn't leave his, because the truth doesn't need to scream. In the control booth, a director whispered, "Stay on her face," and the camera zoomed closer still, catching the subtle shine of tears in the eyes of audience members behind her. The villain tried a last-ditch jab. "You're just playing the victim." But his voice cracked on victim, and it echoed hollow in her cavern of composure. She turned toward him, tilting her head slightly. "Victims don't sit here by accident," she replied softly. "We fight our way here.
We earn it." The studio erupted, applause rolling like a wave, drowning out whatever he tried to say next. And then she delivered the line that would become the night's signature. Her voice dropped lower, steady as a drumbeat. "You can try to erase our stories, but you cannot erase our presence. We are already woven into the flag you claim to defend." Even the moderators froze. Someone in the back row stood, clapping, and more followed, the applause building into a roar. Cameras caught the villain's expression, lips pressed thin, eyes darting toward the exit lights, the posture of a man unaccustomed to losing control. He shuffled his papers again, but they were only a prop now, his grip on the narrative slipping through his fingers. She pressed on, not gloating, but expanding the moment outward. "Tonight is not about me or you," she said, her gaze sweeping the audience. "It's about every family watching who's been told they don't belong. It's about the promise that this country is big enough for all of us. And it's about dignity, the dignity we give each other and the dignity we owe ourselves." With each phrase, she built a kind of moral architecture around herself, a scaffold of principles stronger than any attack. She wove in the Constitution, the Statue of Liberty, and the language of shared sacrifice, turning symbols often wielded against immigrants into affirmations of their rightful place. "We built the railroads," she reminded viewers. "We grow the food. We heal the sick. We fight the wars. And still we are asked to prove we belong. Tonight, I am done proving. Tonight, I am affirming." The villain muttered something under his breath, but it was swallowed by the crowd's applause. The moderators glanced at each other, recognizing the shift. The debate had become a testimonial, and the hero had seized the role of narrator-in-chief. She concluded with a final, deliberate pause. "The question is not whether we belong here," she said slowly. "The question is whether, as a nation, we can live up to our own promise." Another wave of applause, louder still. On the live ticker, polls updated. Approval of her performance surging in real time. Influencers posted side-by-side shots of her calm and his collapse. Editorials were already drafting themselves in the heads of journalists watching. She sat back, exhaling once, and folded her hands again. In the control booth, a producer whispered, "That's the clip. That's the moment." The villain stared at his notes, no longer even pretending to smile. In living rooms across the country, immigrant parents and their children exchanged looks that said, without words, that something important had happened. It wasn't just about policy or politics, it was about visibility, about a reversal of the usual script. For once, the story wasn't the insult, it was the answer. And still she wasn't finished. She let the applause fade to a hush, then leaned back toward the microphone for one last coda, soft but resonant. "This isn't just my rebuttal, it's our reminder. We belong, we endure, and we are not going anywhere." The crowd rose to its feet. The villain lowered his gaze. But the true impact wouldn't be felt until the aftermath.
By the time the broadcast cut to its first commercial break, the internet was already on fire. Notifications stacked on phones like a waterfall of applause. Hashtags proliferating faster than producers could track them. Hashtag Front Door America surged to the top of national trends. Hashtag Real Americans blazed just beneath it, alongside a new tag born from the hero's closing words. Hashtag We Belong. The clip of her mic-drop rebuttal spread at the speed of text messages and group chats, crossing platforms in seconds. On TikTok, creators overlaid her speech with slow-motion effects and swelling music. On Twitter, journalists clipped 30-second soundbites that amassed millions of views before the villain even left the studio. News anchors interrupted programming to run breaking banners over replay loops of the exchange. Split screens flashed across cable news. On the left, the villain's crumpled expression. On the right, the hero's poised gaze. Panelists scrambled to recalibrate their talking points, stunned at the sudden reversal. Some tried to downplay it, calling it optics. Others admitted on air that they had just witnessed a defining political moment.
In living rooms, bars, and community centers, the reaction was visceral. Viewers leapt from couches, clapped, even cried. A mother in Phoenix recorded herself hugging her teenage daughter, whispering, "Did you hear her say we're already woven into the flag?" In New Jersey, a group of students projected the clip on a cafeteria wall, chanting the hero's name between classes. Across the Midwest, immigrant-owned diners placed small TV sets on countertops and replayed the speech during breakfast rush, patrons huddling to watch. Celebrities chimed in within minutes. A pop star with 80 million followers tweeted, "This is what courage looks like. #WeBelong." A veteran actor posted a black-and-white screenshot of the hero's face with the caption, "Real Americans," and within an hour it became a meme template, hundreds of versions flooding Instagram. Even brands jumped aboard, posting graphics about inclusion, clearly eager to align themselves with the moment. Cable commentators, normally quick to interrupt one another, spoke in reverent tones about the speech's construction, how it fused policy and poetry, statistics and stories. "It's rare to see someone transform a live ambush into a national teach-in," one said, shaking his head. Another predicted the moment would be played in classrooms a decade from now. The villain surrogates tried to spin it as emotional manipulation, but their words sounded thin next to the roar of online approval. Memes crystallized overnight. One showed the villain's papers fluttering out of his hands with the caption, "Receipts, please." Another juxtaposed his finger-pointing with her steady hands, labeled "Noise versus Truth." Animated GIFs looped her final line, "We are already woven into the flag," over images of the American flag sewn with 1,000 different faces. Meanwhile, the hero herself stayed off social media, issuing only a single statement thanking viewers for listening beyond the shouting. That restraint only magnified her aura. Commentators called it the new model for public leadership, contrasting it with the villain's late-night rant, posted hours later and swiftly ratioed by his own followers. Inside newsrooms, editors assigned teams to parse the ripple effects. Posters ran flash surveys showing a spike in favorability for the hero among undecided voters. Talk show producers scrambled to book her for prime-time interviews, while advocacy groups reported a surge in sign-ups and donations. In WhatsApp groups, families circulated translated versions of the speech. In college dorms, students reenacted her lines for fun, half meme, half reverence. Visually, it was cinematic. A cascade of screen recordings, split-screen reaction videos, influencers crying on live streams, patriotic remixes, TikTokers layering her words over montage clips of immigrant families and soldiers returning home. The narrative had escaped the studio and become a living organism, evolving as it spread. Through it all, a new energy coalesced. People who had felt invisible hours earlier now saw themselves trending globally. A poet in Los Angeles posted, "I feel taller today." A delivery driver in Ohio wrote, "For the first time, I feel like someone up there speaks for me." Journalists described the surge as an empathy event, a rare moment when political discourse felt communal rather than alienating. And yet, as powerful as the digital tidal wave became, it carried within it the seeds of something deeper. Beyond the memes and trending tags, grassroots groups began planning vigils in town halls, transforming online emotion into offline action. Leaders in immigrant communities framed the speech as a pivot point, urging people to register to vote, to share their own stories, to stand up publicly in ways they hadn't dared before. Even the villain's allies felt the tremor. A leaked text message thread among his advisors, published hours later by a reporter, revealed panic. "We underestimated her poise," one wrote. Another said, "This changes the narrative. She's no longer a niche figure." The villain himself went uncharacteristically silent on his next scheduled appearance, canceling a radio hit and retreating to reassess strategy. Viewers sensed they had witnessed not just a rebuttal, but a rebalancing of power. The night's tension had morphed into a celebration, a collective recognition that dignity could dominate drama, that the underdog could turn the stage into a platform.
It was as if an invisible switch had been flipped, altering the story America told about itself. Yet, amidst the chaos, one final message would rise above the noise. The following morning, as the storm of headlines and hashtags still raged, the hero stepped onto a modest stage at a community center, away from the bright lights of television. Rows of folding chairs were filled with families, students, veterans, and elders, their faces a mosaic of the country itself. No cameras this time, just phones held aloft, streaming live to millions who craved to hear from her again. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone, the echoes of last night's confrontation still reverberating like distant thunder. She began not with triumph, but with gratitude. "I want to thank you for seeing beyond the noise," she said softly, her voice carrying an intimate power. She spoke of her parents' sacrifices, of the nights she spent studying English under a single bulb, of the first time she ever dared to believe she could serve the public. She reminded them, and herself, that every step on her journey had been built on service, not spectacle. Then she reframed the villain's attack. "When someone questions your belonging," she said, "what they're really afraid of is your power to transform the very idea of belonging." Her words rose with each phrase, blending personal memory with civic vision. She invoked not just her own story, but the story of millions who had crossed oceans, deserts, and invisible borders of doubt to stand in rooms like this one. "We are not guests in this country. We are the hands that built it, the voices that sustain it, the dreams that keep it alive." The crowd stirred, some wiping tears, others holding up their phones to capture each syllable. She didn't name the villain once. She didn't have to. Instead, she spoke of dignity as the opposite of arrogance, of service as the antidote to hate. "Dignity," she said, "is not a gift given by those in power. It's a birthright, and it grows stronger each time we stand up without shouting, each time we answer contempt with courage." Her tone swelled into a speech-like crescendo. She painted a picture of an America that could hold many stories at once, an America not threatened by difference, but enriched by it. "Our ancestors' names may have been lost at sea or erased from ledgers, but their values survived. Justice, kindness, determination. These are the true pillars of citizenship." The audience erupted in applause, chants of her name echoing off the walls. She leaned closer to the microphone, lowering her voice to a near whisper that drew everyone in. "This moment is bigger than me. It's bigger than any debate stage. It's about every child who wonders if they're allowed to dream, every worker who's been told to go back, every student who's been made to feel like a guest in their own school. I'm here to tell you, you belong. You are woven into the fabric of this country, and no one can unthread you." The applause became a standing ovation, but she lifted a hand gently for quiet, ending not with a roar, but with a call to action. "Take this energy and carry it into your neighborhoods, your schools, your workplaces. Stand with each other, speak with each other, build with each other. Let's make this movement not just a trending moment, but a turning point." In that instant, the confrontation transformed from a viral clip into a seed. The hero's words transcended the night before, becoming a kind of civic hymn, an anthem for anyone who had felt pushed to the margins. The audience sensed it too. They were no longer just watchers of a spectacle. They were participants in a narrative, co-authors of its next chapter. And as her speech reached its final chord, she looked out over the crowd and smiled, not the smile of victory, but of resolve. "They tried to tell us we didn't belong, but here we are, and here we will stay, and here we will build." Thunderous applause shook the hall. People reached for each other's hands, strangers embracing like family. Phones flashed and streamed as comments poured in from around the country, a living tapestry of affirmation and hope. And with that, the stage was set for the movement to grow.
The camera fades back to the studio backdrop, not the chaos of the debate stage, but a quiet, determined setting. On-screen text recalls the night's defining moment, the hero's mic-drop reply, the villain left speechless, and an audience awakened. Over slow-motion replays of the confrontation, the narrator's voice threads the story together. In one night, a single voice transformed doubt into dignity. We tie back to the title, The Clash That Stunned the Country, but now it's more than a headline. It's proof that courage can eclipse arrogance, that composure can defeat contempt. The images flash, trending hashtags, tear-filled reactions, the standing ovation at the community center. It's not spectacle anymore. It's a signal to everyone watching that the fight for belonging isn't abstract. It's happening right here, right now. The narrator leans in, the tone both urgent and hopeful. If this moment moved you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Share this video, subscribe to this channel, add your name to a chorus that says we belonged, we matter, and we're not backing down. Quick cuts show people of all backgrounds raising their hands, registering to vote, teaching their kids the words they heard last night. We close with an image of the hero walking off stage into a crowd of supporters. No spotlight, no script, just solidarity. Together, the narrator concludes, we can turn one night's courage into a lifetime of change. But only if we stand up, speak out, and keep building. The music swells. The screen fades to black with the channel's logo and a final line. Your voice matters. Join us. And with that, the story ends, but the movement begins.